boring to me, so the dynamics of Apollo just faded away. And
we hit the surface, we were dead level, but it was a pretty good impact, you know, whoop. It's like a Navy carrier landing.
For 50 years, Apollo 16 astronaut Charles Duke kept a secret that no NASA file or space report ever told. He saw something strange on the moon. It moved on its own and made him question what was real. For years, he stayed quiet, afraid no one would believe him. But now, as the years catch up with him, Duke has finally decided to tell the truth. What did he really see on the moon that day? And why has NASA stayed quiet about it for so long? Join us in this video as we reveal the details. Charles Duke reveals the dark truth about the moon. In 1972, Duke was the lunar module pilot who walked on the moon and became a hero. He said not everything they saw or experienced was written down. Some parts were removed, others were changed, and some simply disappeared. It began right after Apollo 16 returned to Earth.
This morning on this special day, to welcome the crew of Apollo 16 to the deck of Ticonderoga.
Duke and Commander John Young were taken to a secret meeting only hours after their spacecraft landed in the Pacific. In that room, they were told that some of their mission logs and reports would be edited before being made public. They were not asked for approval. They were just told it would happen. Duke later said that when he looked at the final version of the report, parts of it were missing. Whole sections of data, numbers, and notes had been deleted. One of the missing events was about a strange signal that appeared 3 times while the spacecraft was orbiting the moon. It came from the same spot every time. Duke said it was clearly recorded during the flight, but when the official report was released, there was no mention of it. The pages that should have shown the signal readings were blank. He also said that during one orbit, the navigation system failed for about 13 minutes on the far side of the moon. The spacecraft's location disappeared from the tracking display. Then, suddenly, it corrected itself. After returning home, Duke checked the technical data, but those 13 minutes were gone. They were not in the public version. His own copy of the data looked different from NASA's. That was when he realized that something had been changed on purpose. Another strange thing happened during the module's rotation. The sensors showed electromagnetic interference, a sudden burst of energy that should not have been there. But when Duke read the official records, that event had also been removed. Even a note written by Commander Young, which said, "No discussion of Southern Lights of Orbit 2 as directed," had vanished from the files. Duke later found that the archive had been locked and reclassified. When the astronauts stepped onto the moon's surface, Duke saw things that did not make sense. Near a small crater, he found a line of deep curved tracks in the dust. The spacing was perfect, almost measured, and not like any human or machine mark. He recorded the coordinates and made a note in his log. But when he looked at the photos later, the marks were gone. The area looked smooth, as if nothing had ever been there. He also saw a bright light about 50 meters away. It reflected strongly, even though there was no metal or glass to cause it. When Young walked toward it, the light disappeared. The report later called it a light effect caused by angle, but Duke disagreed. He believed it was something real. Later, while collecting rock samples, his radiation meter jumped strangely before settling down. This had never happened anywhere else. The sample was taken back to Earth, but scientists said it was just old basalt rock with nothing special. Duke was not convinced. When Duke got back to Earth, he hoped his reports would be included in the archives. Instead, many of them were removed or rewritten. He was told to describe things in a more normal way. When he refused to change the wording of the navigation error, his report was rejected completely. He later found out that even the cockpit audio recordings had been replaced with new ones that removed the strange moments. After Apollo 16, Duke began to realize that silence was part of the mission. Everything looked perfect to the public. Smiling astronauts, clean data, and exciting headlines. But behind that image, there were deleted pages and quiet warnings. Duke said that he sometimes received anonymous letters and calls reminding him of his promise to stay silent. He carried that silence for decades. He suffered from insomnia and anxiety, always remembering what he saw in the Descartes region, the bright patch, the missing tracks, and the feeling that something unseen was watching. Years later, he tried to restore his missing notes to NASA's records, but his request was rejected. They told him the files were already complete. That was the moment he understood that his truth would never be officially accepted. If the world remembers Neil Armstrong's first step and Buzz Aldrin's famous words, then who was the steady voice guiding them from Earth? And what untold story did he carry to the moon himself? Let's take a closer look. Charles Duke, the man who spoke to the moon and then walked on it. Charles Duke is one of the few men who has both talked to astronauts on the moon and later walked there himself. During the Apollo 11 mission in 1969, his calm voice was heard all around the world when Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin made their first steps on the moon.
Stepping down on the moon. If he's testing that first step, he must be stepping down on the moon at this point.
His words, "Roger, tranquility, we copy you on the ground," confirmed that man had finally landed on another world. But while his voice became famous, his face did not. Few people knew that behind that steady voice was a man who would one day follow the same path and leave his own footprints on the moon. Before his own flight, Duke worked as a Capcom, or capsule communicator. That meant he was the only person who could talk directly with the astronauts in space. Every message, every problem, and every success came through him. It was a huge responsibility. A single mistake in what he said could have caused disaster. Duke often said that being Capcom during Apollo 11 changed his life forever. When he finally got the chance to fly to the moon himself on Apollo 16, it felt like life had come full circle. He had once guided others from Earth, and now he would see the same view with his own eyes. Duke said many details about Apollo 16 have been forgotten or misunderstood. He doesn't want to tell wild stories. He just wants people to know what it was really like. He believes that the public only saw the clean and simple version of the mission through photos and documentaries. The real experience, he says, was far more powerful, beautiful, but also strange and lonely. Duke said the moon was unlike anything he had ever seen. The silence was so deep that it almost felt like time had stopped. The sky was not blue, not even gray. It was pitch black, like a curtain that swallowed everything. No stars were visible because the sunlight on the ground was too bright. The surface itself was pale and dusty, shining so strongly that it hurt his eyes. He also said that, contrary to what people imagine, they could not actually see Earth from where they landed. The planet was directly above their heads, and their helmets made it impossible to look up. For Duke, that was a small but important truth that changed how people imagined the moon landings. Walking on the moon was harder than it looked. Every move had to be slow and careful. The heavy suits made it hard to turn or bend, and the low gravity made every step feel strange. Duke said it was exhausting, but also deeply spiritual. Standing in a place where no life existed made him realize how small and fragile people really are. He said that moment gave him a new respect for Earth and everything on it. Apollo 16 turned out to be one of NASA's most important scientific missions. Duke and Commander John Young carried out several experiments that changed how scientists understood the moon. They set up the first telescope ever used outside Earth's atmosphere and captured light that cannot be seen from our planet. They also collected more than 200 pounds of rocks and soil, which are still being studied decades later. Their instruments found traces of elements like iron, titanium, and magnesium, proof that the moon was more complex than anyone had thought. Duke sometimes felt that Apollo 16 didn't get as much credit as other missions. People remembered the first landing and the Apollo 13 crisis.
At the time, America's third mission to land on the moon, Apollo 13, lifted off on April 11, 1970.
But they forgot that Apollo 16 made some of the biggest discoveries. Despite the serious nature of their mission, Duke and Young still found time for laughter. One moment that became famous later showed Duke trying to do a high jump on the moon. He lost his balance and nearly fell backward. If his backpack had hit the ground too hard, it could have been fatal. Duke later joked about it, calling it the Lunar Olympics, but he also admitted that it was a reminder of how dangerous every move could be. Over the years, Duke also faced people who claimed the moon landings were fake. He handled those comments calmly. When asked if it was all staged, he would simply smile and say, "Sir, I was there." He often explained that it would have been impossible to fake something so massive, involving so many people, and that denying it disrespected the brave men and women who risked everything for those missions. Out of the 12 men who have walked on the moon, only 4 are still alive today, and Duke is one of them. That makes him feel both proud and responsible. He supports NASA's new Artemis program, which plans to take astronauts back to the moon and then to Mars. To him, the moon was never the final destination, it was just the beginning. After conquering earlier lunar missions, could NASA push the limits one last time, risking everything to uncover the moon's oldest secrets and prove that human exploration was still worth the danger? Let's delve deeper. Apollo 16, the mission that pushed human limits. When NASA sent Apollo 16 to the moon in April 1972, it was not just another space trip. It was one of the riskiest missions ever attempted. Earlier, Apollo missions had landed on smooth and flat areas, but Apollo 16 was meant to go to a rough and rocky place called the Descartes Highlands. Scientists believed that this area was one of the oldest parts of the moon. They hoped it would reveal how the moon was formed and what its early surface looked like. It was a big scientific step, but also a dangerous one. The surface was uneven, full of deep holes and big boulders. A small mistake could have destroyed the spacecraft. Still, NASA took the risk because there was a chance Apollo 16 could be one of the last missions to the moon. They wanted to make it count. The goal of Apollo 16 was simple but important: to learn the real story of the moon's surface. By studying the Descartes Highlands, scientists hoped to find rocks much older than the ones collected by Apollo 11 and 12. These rocks could tell how the moon's crust had formed over time. The crew was also asked to test new tools, collect more samples, and drive the new lunar rover farther than any team before them. It was a mission that mixed science with courage. The crew of Apollo 16 was made up of 3 men: John Young, Charles Duke, and Ken Mattingly. John Young was the commander, a calm and experienced astronaut who had already flown 4 times before. He was known for being steady and quiet, the kind of man who stayed focused when things went wrong. Charles Duke, the lunar module pilot, was much younger and full of energy. The third man, Ken Mattingly, was the command module pilot. He would stay in orbit around the moon while Young and Duke went down to the surface. Their teamwork was built on respect, but also on past mistakes. 2 years earlier, Duke had accidentally given the Apollo 13 crew German measles. Because of that, Mattingly was removed from the mission just days before launch. It was a painful memory for both men, so Apollo 16 became a second chance for them to prove themselves and to finish what they had started. Mattingly wanted to show that he was still one of NASA's best pilots. Duke wanted to prove he could be calm and precise under pressure. John Young's leadership helped balance them both. He was serious, but he also made sure they stayed focused and confident. Before launch, the 3 men spent months in intense training. They practiced landings over and over again in simulators that copied the dangerous landscape of the Descartes Highlands. They learned how to drive the new lunar rover across rough ground, how to handle broken tools, and how to collect rock samples correctly.
Find the kinds of rocks of interest among all the various kinds of rocks up there. We went through a lot of training exercises.
They also studied geology, learning how to describe what they saw in simple but accurate ways. NASA wanted them to be both explorers and scientists. The men were also trained for emergencies. They practiced what to do if the rover broke down, if an engine failed, or if they lost contact with Earth. Duke even learned how to give medical help in case one of them got hurt or sick. On April 20th, 1972, after years of planning and training, the Apollo 16 lunar module, named Orion, began its descent toward the moon. The view from above was breathtaking but terrifying. The ground below looked uneven, with dark craters and long shadows stretching across the hills. Duke later said the scene looked more dangerous than any of their practice sessions. As they got closer, small warning lights flashed on the control board. Still, John Young stayed calm, guiding the lander with small bursts of fuel. Then, at last, they heard the words everyone was waiting for. Contact light. They had landed safely. When Charles Duke stepped out and looked around, he was amazed. The landscape looked endless and empty. The silence was so deep that it almost felt like the world had stopped moving. He could see the bright dust shining under the sunlight, and it felt strange to realize he was standing somewhere no human had ever been before. The ground was rough, and every step left a sharp footprint that would probably stay there for thousands of years. For John Young and Charles Duke, that landing was not just a success. It was a moment that proved how far people could go when they trusted each other and refused to give up. They had trained hard, faced danger, and made history together. If Apollo 16 proved how far human courage and science could go, what did Charles Duke witness on that same mission that left even NASA without an answer? Let's learn more. The Shadow on the Moon, Charles Duke's Secret, and NASA's Silence. Charles Duke's strange experience during the Apollo 16 mission still remains one of the most puzzling moments in space history. Even after 50 years, what he claimed to have seen on the moon, a fast-moving dark shape crossing the lunar surface, has never been fully explained. Though Duke is known as one of NASA's most respected astronauts, this one-second event became a quiet shadow over his long career. For many years, Duke never spoke about what he saw. He followed NASA's strict code of silence, which discouraged astronauts from talking about anything that could not be explained scientifically. He had built a reputation as a calm and logical professional, and he knew that sharing a strange story without evidence could damage his career. But long after retirement, when he no longer feared judgment, Duke finally opened up. He said that during one of Apollo 16's rover drives, he saw something move, something solid and fast, not dust or glare. When Duke later reviewed the archived mission footage, he froze on a frame that seemed to confirm his memory. The dark shape appeared clearly, crossing the landscape and casting a shadow. It was not a lens glitch, film scratch, or dust pattern. It moved too cleanly, too fast, and too deliberately. Experts who studied similar footage gave their explanations, saying it could have been light reflection, drifting dust, or damage to the film. But none of those answers seemed to fit what Duke described. NASA never made an official statement about the event. The footage was filed away like thousands of other mission records, with no comment or follow-up. This silence has only deepened curiosity. Many believe the agency wanted to avoid public attention, especially since Apollo 16 came near the end of the program, when public interest and funding were already falling. Others think NASA simply didn't find the footage important enough to investigate. Over the years, Duke's story has inspired endless theories. Some people believe it was just an illusion caused by the rover's movement. Others think it could have been a small rock dislodged by the wheels. A few believe it might be something beyond our current understanding, something that science cannot yet explain. To Duke, the mystery was not about aliens or conspiracies. It was about honesty. He wanted to admit that even the best-trained astronauts can see things they can't fully explain.
I'm astronaut Charlie Duke. I was lunar module pilot on Apollo 16 in 1972.
He once said he didn't want to die keeping this truth locked away. His statement reminded the world that space exploration, no matter how advanced, still leaves room for the unknown. The question remains unanswered. The footage still exists, but NASA has never explained it. Maybe one day, future missions with better cameras will return to the same area and find answers. Until then, Duke's story stands as a quiet reminder that even on the most well-recorded mission in history, mystery still finds a way to survive. Before Charles Duke left his footprints on the moon, what life journey shaped the man behind the helmet? Let's find out. From fighter pilot to moonwalker, the remarkable journey of Charles Duke. Charles Duke's road to the moon started long before he ever saw a rocket. It started in a small town in North Carolina during World War II. where he grew up watching soldiers leave for battle and heroes come back in uniform. His father served in the Navy, and the family always moved from place to place. These early years taught Duke how to fit in quickly and stay focused, lessons that would later shape his life as a pilot and astronaut. As a boy, Duke was curious and driven. He loved science, machines, and the idea of flying. By the time he was a teenager, he wanted a life filled with mysteries and goals. When he was just 15, he joined the Admiral Farragut Academy in Florida, a strict military school known for training future officers. The academy gave him structure and duty. He learned to wake up before sunrise, march in formation, and follow orders completely. More importantly, it planted in him a strong sense of duty and leadership. It was here that his dream of becoming a naval aviator truly started. After finishing high school, Duke achieved his next big goal. He was accepted into the United States Naval Academy. Surrounded by some of the country's brightest and most determined young men, he worked hard and stayed focused. His dream was to become a pilot in the Navy, soaring high above the clouds. But that dream hit a sudden stop when doctors discovered he had astigmatism in one eye. It was a small eye condition, but it was enough to block his chances of becoming a Navy pilot. For most people, that kind of setback would have ended the dream right there. But Duke wasn't ready to give up. Instead of walking away from aviation, he looked for another path and found it with the United States Air Force. Unlike the Navy, the Air Force accepted him for flight training. In 1957, he began his journey to become a fighter pilot. He trained in several aircraft, including the T-33 jet and the F-86 Sabre, one of the most advanced planes of that time. Duke's calm focus and quick thinking helped him stand out. He later majored as an interceptor pilot, flying fast and exact missions that needed total control and strength. From 1959 to 1962, Duke served in Germany during one of the most serious times of the Cold War. The Berlin Wall had just gone up, and issues between the East and West could happen at any time. Flying with the 526th Fighter Interceptor Squadron, Duke's mission was to defend European skies from possible Soviet threats. Every flight could have led to a real battle. This period tested his courage and taught him how to stay calm even when danger was close, a skill that would serve him well years later on the moon. When he came back to the US, the world was changing fast. The Soviet Union had started Sputnik, and America was racing to catch up in space. Duke saw this as a new task. He wanted to learn more about science and technology, so he joined the Air Force Institute of Technology, which sent him to study at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT. There, Duke dove deep into the study of guidance systems, the technology that would one day help direct spacecraft safely through space. His graduate research focused on the Apollo guidance and navigation system, without knowing that he would someday rely on it himself on the moon. While studying at MIT, Duke met a lot of astronauts who encouraged him deeply, including Charles Bassett, who spoke so well about the future of space search. Listening to their stories made Duke see flying not just as a military job, but as a way to see new worlds and make history. His dream began to shift from flying jets to flying rockets. After earning his degree, Duke attended the U.S. Air Force Test Pilot School at Edwards Air Force Base, the same place where many of NASA's astronauts had trained.
Aim high, stay focused on your career, whatever it is, you'll figure it out, but don't give up.
There, he proved himself as not only a skilled pilot, but also a calm and intelligent problem solver. His mix of technical skill, courage, and discipline caught NASA's attention. In 1966, Duke received the call he had always dreamed of. He was selected as one of NASA's new astronaut candidates. All the years of training, setbacks, and hard work had led to this moment. The boy who once feared he'd never fly had earned a place among the few who would one day leave Earth behind. After walking on the moon, how did Charles Duke's journey turn from outer space to inner faith? Keep watching to find out more. Charles Duke's hidden photograph and the dream that changed his life. When Duke went to the moon in 1972, he carried something that was not part of the official mission. Inside his suit, he had a tiny family photograph of his wife and his 2 young sons. Most people believed he brought it just because he missed his family and wanted to leave something meaningful on the moon. But years later, Duke explained that there was more to it than that. The picture was not only personal, it had a secret reason behind it. He said that before the mission, he was told he could take one personal item with him. It was approved quietly, and he was told there would be no questions as long as he agreed to one rule: he could bring one thing, leave it there, and never speak of it again. Duke said he never truly knew who gave that permission, but he followed the instructions exactly.
While he was on the moon, he snapped a photo of the family photograph with him, his 2 sons, and his wife, which remains on the moon to this day.
When the Apollo 16 team landed on the Descartes Highlands, Duke chose a certain place near the lunar rover to leave the photograph. The spot wasn't picked randomly. Earlier in the mission, the crew had noticed strange signal interference coming from that same area. While collecting rock samples, Duke took out the photo and placed it carefully on the gray dust, not far from a rock that had a strange marking on it, a code that didn't match any NASA record. He laid the picture face up toward the Earth and walked away quietly. When NASA later showed images of the photo to the public, everyone thought it was just a sweet tribute to his family. But Duke later said that the back of the picture had something written on it, a faint code that looked like a sequence used in NASA's private communication files. Years later, when the photo was scanned in Houston, the writing on the back looked faded, almost erased. Duke said softly, "I wasn't supposed to leave anything but equipment." But that photograph was different. It was requested. For many years, Duke avoided questions about the picture. Still, he once mentioned that the place where he left it later became the same area where NASA's tools picked up unusual underground vibrations. He never said they were connected, but the coincidence always stayed in his mind. He described the moment as if it had been meant to happen. That photograph, he once said, was not just a memory. It was a message that I didn't fully understand. But the mystery started even before the flight. A week before Apollo 16 launched, Duke became very sick with the flu. While resting in the isolation quarters, he had a vivid dream that frightened him deeply. In the dream, he stood on a wide, gray land with a dark sky above him. The air felt heavy and silent, and the ground hummed faintly as if something alive was under it. He looked around and saw the shadow of a lunar module nearby, but no people, no voices. He called out, yet nothing answered him. When he woke up, he was sweating, shaking, and confused. He told his wife, Dottie Duke, about it, saying, "I'm not sure I'll come back." It was the only time she saw real fear in him. After the mission, the dream came back to him over and over again. Duke later said he didn't believe it was just a nightmare. It felt like a warning or a memory of something deeper. After Apollo 16, Duke's life began to change. Friends noticed he became quiet and thoughtful. He left his engineering work and turned more toward helping people and speaking about faith and hope. Over time, he said his peace came not from science, but from God's power that guided him through his confusion and fear. Even in his later years, though, that strange feeling never left him. Sometimes, when he looked at old photos of his family, he would pause, as if comparing them to something far away. He would say softly, "There are things out there that humans just can't explain." So while the world remembers Charles Duke as a hero of space, some still wonder if that photograph, half buried in moon dust, holds a story the world was never meant to hear. What do you think about the revelation of Charles Duke? Share your thoughts in the comments section below. Thank you for watching this video. We hope you found it interesting. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Click the next video shown on your screen to catch up on your favorite celebrity stories. See you there.